Hi, my name is Robin Wood and I'm the current maintainer of DVWA. In this video, I'm going to look at a number of common installation issues raised in support tickets in GitHub. I'm going to explain what causes the issue and how to fix it. I'm going to be using DVWA installed in Kali Linux, but some of these issues also apply to DVWA installed in Windows through XAMPP. Before we get started, the best way to avoid these issues is to use the project README file and the installation videos that I've created. Both of these go step by step through the install process, making sure everything is set up correctly and working as it should. The vast majority of issues raised in GitHub tickets are caused by users not following instructions, missing out steps, or making mistakes while following them. The best advice is to look at each instruction and look at what you're running. Make sure the two match, and then make sure the outputs match. I've seen too many people copy-pasting commands and not watching the output for errors. It unfortunately happens all too often that people send in screenshots to show that they've run a command, but if you look at the output from the command, there's an error message. If you read the error message, you can usually work out what went wrong and from there how to fix it. The last thing before we get started, if none of these solutions help fix your problem and you have to raise a support ticket, please put some effort into solving the problem before creating the ticket. Read any error messages you get, check error logs, and look back through closed tickets. If you come to me with a ticket just saying it doesn't work, then I won't be that sympathetic. You've shown no effort in solving the problem yourself, then why should I put any effort into helping you fix it? If you provide all the information I request in the ticket template and show that you've done some work yourself, then I'm more than happy to help get things working. The idea behind DVWA is that it's a learning tool, primarily for web applications, but by fixing install problems, you'll also learn more about the system behind the application, and in security, all knowledge is good knowledge. If you need help on creating a support ticket, I've written a blog post explaining the difference between good and bad support tickets and how to create a good one. I'll put a link to it in the video description below. Remember, most open source developers don't get paid for any of their development or support time, so the easier you make it for them to help you, the more chance you have of getting the help you want. With all that out of the way, let's move on to the first issue. So this issue doesn't come up very often, but it is worth a mention because it does confuse some newcomers to web server configuration. You've installed DVWA, you browse to localhost, and what you get is the Apache default homepage. You don't get DVWA as you're expecting. The reason for this, if we have a look at the Apache config and we look at the configuration file, what we'll see is Apache has what's called a document root, var www HTML. If we look in that directory, we will see index.html, which is this default Apache page. We'll also see the DVWA directory. So what that shows is DVWA has been installed in a directory called DVWA on the document root. So rather than accessing localhost, you need to access localhost/DVWA. Doing that, you'll get to your login page. Something else to watch out for on this is Linux in general is case sensitive. So if you try to access DVWA, but rather than doing it in capitals, which matches the directory, if you try to access it in lowercase, you'll get page not found. Because, as we can see, the directory is in uppercase, that's how we're going to access it. So just watch out for that. If you've installed it in capital DVWA, then that's where you need to go to view the site. For this issue, you've done your installation, you've browsed the site, and all you get is a blank page. No content shown. If you look at the source, no HTML source either. The only clue that something is wrong, if we look in the console, you'll see you've got a 500 error rather than a 200 OK, which you should get. So what we're seeing here is actually two issues. The first we're going to try and fix, the second one we're going to leave till later. The reason you're getting the blank page is something has broken with DVWA. For now, we don't care what that is, we just know something's broken. By default, PHP will not show any errors to screen. Part of the setup process, as it says in the README, is to turn that configuration around so that errors will be displayed on both startup and normal errors. If you're getting a blank page, what that means is you've not done this step. Show that. We come to our console and we have a look at the PHP configuration file. For me, I'm using PHP version 8.2, so I'm looking in the 8.2 directory. If you're using a different version of PHP, this number will be different. If we have a look in here, we are looking, as it says, for display errors, display startup errors. Come in here. This is the reference guide. This is not the section we're going to change. A little bit further down, this is the line. There's no comment at the start of it, which means this is an active configuration element. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change that from off to on. And we're going to do the same down here with display startup errors. Now, having made those changes, the next thing we need to do is to restart Apache so they actually take effect. But before we do that, I'm going to show you one more thing. If we go to DVWA and we go to the setup page, as you'll see, display errors and display startup errors are currently disabled. So that's with it off. If you're getting a blank page and you go to the setup page and you see these are off, this will be the cause of your blank page. So at the moment they're disabled. What we need to do is restart Apache. So service Apache 2 restart. That will restart Apache. By default it restarts the PHP that it's running. We reload this page. They're now both enabled. So if we go back to our login page, we now get an error. So as I said, blank page is two issues. One, your display errors are turned off, and then two, the issue behind it that's been hidden by it is something else is broken in DVWA. So for now, we're going to leave this one, and yeah, we're just going to leave it at fixing the blank page. The vast majority of issues raised relate to databases, so we're going to cover a few of those now. The first one is connection refused. What this means is that PHP is not able to talk to your database server. The most common reason for this is the database server is not running. To check that, bring up a terminal and we can do service MariaDB status. And what you're looking for here is the active state. As it says, at the moment our status is inactive or dead, which is why we're getting the problem. We want to start the service, simple case, service MariaDB start. If we check the status now, we've got active running. If we go back to our website, refresh, we get our login page. Now, if that's not the problem, and when you check the status it is running but you're still getting the error, there is another potential reason for this. And what that is you've got the database server name or IP wrong in your DVWA config file. To check that, what we need to do is have a look in the config. So var www.html, that's our document root, DVWA directory, notice it's uppercase, and then config and the config file. What we're looking for in here is this DB server line. Ignore the first bit unless you've been messing with environment variables, and what you're looking for is the end bit here. And on a default setup you should be looking for 127.0.0.1. You don't want the IP address of your host in there, you also don't want the name localhost. On a standard setup where MariaDB is running on the same box as your web server, it has to be 127.0.0.1. Now, if you know quite a bit about Linux, what you're probably thinking is, well, localhost is the same as 127.0.0.1. Yes and no. In the world of databases, there is a difference. Localhost, when talking to MySQL or MariaDB, means connect through Unix sockets, not over the network. And by default, the database service is not listening on Unix sockets. So if in here you've put localhost rather than 127.0.0.1, you will get errors. So what you're looking for, DB server 127.0.0.1, nothing else. So hopefully that will fix the connection refused problems. This error and the next one are very similar, so we need to read the error message carefully to make sure we're debugging the right problem. This one very specifically says access denied for user to database. The next one we're going to look at will say access denied for user in, and then it will give a file. It will not mention database. So if you've got this to database, then this is the problem for you. If it says in and a file name, then the next issue is going to be the one you need to look at. So to read the error message, it says access denied for user DVWA at localhost to database DWVA. So what this is telling you is that the user you have got does not have access to this database. And if you're reading carefully, what you'll notice is this is DWVA rather than DVWA. In more than 99% of the cases I've seen where we have this problem, it is a very simple typo like this. So DWVA rather than DVWA. Debugging this and fixing this is very simple. Go to our command line and we're going to edit our config file. Remember, var www.html is our document root. DVWA in capitals is where we've installed the app to. And then we're going to look in the config directory and the config file. If we're looking here, we have our database settings, the user, DVWA, and the password. Now, because it says in the error, access denied for user to database, we know the user is able to log into the database. We do not need to modify the user or the password. They're correct, they're working. Our problem is with the database. So as we can see here, database DWVA. So very simple. If we swap these around, DVWA, and we save that, we come back into the application, reload, and we fixed it. And we can now log in. Nice and easy fix. And there we go. Now, if we do this and we look at our config file and we think it's right, we've not got a typo in there, they're both saying DVWA, we're sure we've got it all correct, we can go on to the next step of debugging. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to go into our database and we're going to go into MariaDB. This is asking for your password. This is the password when you set it up. I can't tell you this, this is the one that you entered. So if you've forgotten this or lost it, then it's over to you to go away and do your research, find out how to get back into the database. Once we're in here, we're going to see what databases we've set up. So we're going to run the show databases command. And in here, we have our list of databases and we have DVWA. If you look at this and it's DWVA or DVAW, this is where you've made your typo in creating the database. I'll show you how to fix it in a minute. If you think that's correct, the next command we're going to run is show grants for DVWA localhost. Obviously in here, if you've changed the name of your database user, then you need to specify the user that you're doing. But for most of you, this is going to be DVWA. What we'll see here is usage. So DVWA at localhost can connect to the database. And this is the line we want. Grant all privileges on dvwa.star, so that's our database name, to our user. If you've got a typo here, either in the database name or the username, then this is going to be causing you a problem. So it's either going to be you've specified the wrong database name when you've created the database, or you've set up the privileges wrong when you've done that bit. Easiest way to fix those, if we go to the README and if we look in the database setup section, the easiest thing to do is just to rerun the database setup. So create database and make sure you get the database name right. Do not rerun this section. We have a user, it can connect to the database, that bit's working, so do not run this bit. Grant access to the database, DVWA, to our user, and finally flush privileges. Flush privileges resets the permissions cache in the database so that all the changes that you've made are actually there and ready to go. If you don't run that command, there's a good chance all your changes will just be ignored. So make sure you run that. If you do all of that and you're still having problems, then something else is wrong and feel free to raise a ticket. As I said in the previous section, this error and that one are very similar, so make sure that you read the error message carefully and make sure you're debugging the correct problem. In this instance, we have access denied for user in and a file name. In the last section, we had access denied for user to database. So if you see a to database in your error, you need the previous section. If you don't see that, if you just see in and a file name, then this is the section for you. What this error is telling you is that you've got your user credentials wrong. So in the previous one, the user was able to log in but not access the database. In this one, it says the user that you've specified is not able to log into the database. And there are actually two variations of this. This one here where we have access denied for user using password yes, and the variant access denied for user and just an in. First one is telling you that your user is correct, you're specifying password for it, but it can't log in. So you got your username correct, but the password wrong. This version is saying your user is wrong. This user does not exist in the database. So again, work out which one you've got, which variant is affecting you. Now, pretty much everybody who reports this issue to me swears that they've got the credentials correct. There are no typos, they've typed it all perfectly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the MariaDB command line tool to check this and prove whether the credentials are correct or not. We're going to start off by using a command called grep. What this does is it searches files for a given string. So here we've done grep, we search for the string db_, and we're looking at our config file. And what it's done is it's pulled back a couple of comments and then our database connection strings. We're now going to use these strings and the MariaDB command line tool. So MariaDB, we're going to do a -u to tell it the username. Now we're going to be very specific here. We're going to copy and paste. We're not going to type. So we're going to select that, right click, copy, right click, paste. And the reason we're doing this is sometimes what you think you've typed or what you're about to type is different to what's actually there. So by doing it this way, we're making sure that exactly what is in the config file is exactly what ends up on the command line. So we've specified our user. We're now going to do -p for our password. Now, in a username, you can have a space between the U and the username. In the password, you can't. So we make sure there's no space here. The other thing we're going to do is wrap our password in quotes. Reason for that is it just stops any special characters being interpreted by the command line. So here we go, MariaDB, specifying our user, specifying our password. And there we go, we've got our error, access denied for user using password yes. And what we'll see is that is exactly the same error as we got from the web app. So this shows that despite what you think, your credentials that you've put in the config file do not match that the credentials that you've put into MariaDB when you set it all up. There are a couple of ways to fix this. The easiest is just to have a look at what's there and think about what you did when you set up. Maybe when you set it up, you put a lowercase p. So let's try that. We run our command, lowercase p, and we get in. Brilliant. We found the problem. Typo in the config file. It should be a lowercase p rather than uppercase p. Let's see if we can edit that. So go to our config file, go in here, drop that to a lowercase p, come back to our web app, refresh, and there we go, we're in. So that's the simple fix. Have a look at what's there, check that what you've got matches what you think you've got. If you think you might have done something different, have a play with it on the command line and see whether you can actually get it working easily or not. Because if you can do, that saves a lot of effort. If you've no idea what you've got wrong, if you still think you've got it correct, we can start to dig into MariaDB a bit more and look at what's actually there. So to do that, we're going to do MariaDB, and we're just going to specify -p. This is going to log us in as the root user. As I said before, I don't know the password for this. This is your password. So we've logged in. First thing we're going to do is check a list of usernames. So we're going to do select user from mysql.global priv. Don't forget the semicolon on the end. And that's going to show us a list of users that are set up in the database. So here we go. We've got our DVWA user, and we've got the other standard ones in there. So if we scroll back up here, you need to check that your DB user, DVWA, matches the user here. If it doesn't, that's where you've gone wrong. You can start to change usernames, you can rename users, but the easiest way to fix that is to go back to the README, database setup, and create yourself a new user. So assuming your database is set up properly, you do a create user and specify a username here that is distinct from the others, so you're not going to mess it up, you're not going to mix it up with the one that's already in there. Create a user, grant it permissions, and then flush privileges. And that should set you up a new user, put those credentials into your config file, and that should get you working again. If the database usernames match and you don't want to go through that process, what you can then try and do is just change the password for your user. So to do that, we do set password for DVWA at localhost, and we're going to set that equal password, and this needs to be quoted, and I'm going to change the password here. I'm going to go hello world. So that's setting a new password. Do that, save it. As always, we need to do a flush privileges. That resets the access rules in the database. Without that, your changes won't take effect. So I've just changed my password to hello world. We go back up here and we try to log in. We get our error again, which is what we'd expect. So we need to come out of here. I'm going to edit the config file, and I'm going to change the password here to our new one, hello world. Save the changes, come back to the web app and reload, and there we go, we're working. So if you see this error, it means you've got your credentials wrong. Whether you think you've typed them right or not, access denied for user means the credentials are wrong in some way. Either you've got your database name wrong, as the previous example, or you've got your username wrong or password wrong from this example. Go through the steps, debug it all, work out, and it's all fixable. You've just got to work out which error you've got and then follow the steps for fixing it. In this video, I've tried to cover all the major issues that I've seen people have when they're installing DVWA for the first time. But obviously, there are more things that could go wrong. If something happens and it's not covered in this video, first thing to do is stop and look at any error message that you're getting. Usually by properly reading an error message and trying to understand what it says, you can work out what's going wrong. If it says password failure, then check your passwords. If it's cannot find a library, then look what libraries you've got installed, work out how to install the missing libraries. Quite often, by just taking the error, putting it into Google, having a look through, you can work out how to fix your own problems. DVWA is designed primarily for learning about testing web applications. However, if you want to be a good web app tester, you need to know the full stack. Just understanding the web side of it, the GUI side of it, will get you so far. But understanding all the extras like file system permissions, database permissions, common file system layouts, are directories case sensitive or not? Can you write certain directories? What libraries are installed? What other software is there available on the box? Knowing all of that kind of thing will really help you as an app tester. For example, if you get local file inclusion, being able to understand where on the file system your application is installed will help you work out what files you can then load in or how to access other files. So as well as getting it installed and learning the web app side of it, try and learn the rest of the stack, understand why the install works like it does and the full process, and I say it will help you in the long run. If you still have issues after that and you can't work them out, then part of the GitHub repo, we have an issues section. If you go in there and create a new issue, you've got various options. The one you probably want is installation. Give it a title, and then, as it says, please make sure you've read the README, watch the video, and do as much research as you can before opening bugs. Describe the bug, say what's happening. The database isn't starting up when it's supposed to, and the create tables is failing. Something like that. If describe the bug says it doesn't work, I will close the ticket. To reproduce, how do you do it? What's causing it? Just saying I get a blank screen doesn't tell me anything. I get a blank screen when I'm on the low level of SQL injection and I put in this string, means I can actually go in there and try and debug it. So the more information you can give me, the better. The logs, last 5 lines of the Apache log file. So this is the one that catches most people out. If you've not looked at web servers before, assuming you're running the standard Apache server, you can find log files quite easily by looking in var log Apache 2 error log. So most Linux systems store the logs in var log. We're running Apache, so the Apache directory, and then the error log. If you have a look, tail command shows the last 10 lines by default. And all the errors here are the ones that have been picked up throughout this video. So most of them are access denied, user credential failures, or database access failures. When I ask for the last 5 entries, have a look what's there. If there are 20 entries and they're all identical, just post the one and say they're all the same. If you look back and looking at the timestamp, which is this first field, if within the last few minutes there is a whole selection of, say, 20 logs that are all different, well, post them all, because there might be something interesting in them that shows what's wrong. It's use common sense, have a look, think. In this instance, I'd rather have slightly more information than too little. Something that also might be useful, you've got the error log there. You've also got an access log. And the access log just shows what you've been trying to request. So in here, that shows we've been doing a GET request to DVWA setup. This is useful where people say, oh, I've been trying to access the site and I keep getting a 404. And we look in here and we see that they're accessing it with lowercase DVWA, where you're supposed to be accessing it with uppercase. So things like this are useful for me if you're creating an issue, but also useful for yourself if you're trying to debug stuff. If we go back to the issue, expected behavior, clear description of what you expect to happen. So sometimes it's fairly obvious. I've clicked the setup button, I expect the setup to run. Sometimes it might be a bit different. You might click the setup button, you might expect for some reason another window to pop up. You might expect things to be done for you that aren't. So describe what you're thinking should happen. This is an important one here. What have you done to help fix the issue yourself? I will give back similar amount of effort to what you put in. If you turn around and say, I've done nothing, then I'm probably going to say, okay, and close the issue, close the ticket. If you show that you have tried, okay, I did the setup and it failed, so I looked in the log, I found this error, I did a bit of research on it, I found that it means the password's wrong, I think I've tried to change the password but I'm not sure on it, so on and so on. If you do that, I'm quite happy to help work out what's going wrong. If you say, it didn't work, no, I didn't do anything, fix it for me, then tough luck, you're on your own. Screenshots, if applicable, drop in some screenshots. And then this bit's useful. OS, saying it doesn't work, but not saying whether it's on Linux or Windows. If you're running a really old version of PHP, that might affect things. If you're complaining that a module's not working and you haven't installed the right version of the PHP modules, then that will help. So detailing all of these. And finally, anything else that you think might help. Just anything that you think could give you give more information. So that's it. Create that, and I will try and help you. But as I say, most people find that once they start filling in that ticket and they work through things and look for the information, they do the research, they think about what should you actually be expecting from this rather than just what's happening. You tend to be able to solve stuff yourself, even if initially you don't think you can. So work through it, create the issue. Also, don't just create an issue and then walk away and expect it to be fixed. Create the issue and carry on trying to debug it. Carry on trying to work towards it. I might be able to get to it same day, it might be a week later. So if you want to get this working, keep working on it for that week. You might still find the issue, find the fix. If you do find it, please go back, report the fix, and say what it was. Another good place to look at, if you're in the issues, as well as searching the open ones, if we change this and take the state off and search again, this will show you all the closed issues. Have a scroll through some of these. You might find that your answer or answer to your issue is in here. But please don't just drop a thing on saying me too and on a closed issue and hope it gets all reopened. If the information isn't there, create your own ticket. It might look similar, but if this was closed, I don't know, 5 years ago, you might be having something that looks similar, but it's probably different. So create a new ticket rather than just trying to reopen an old one. And with that, I think we'll call it an end on this video. Hopefully the solutions I've given will get you working and solve pretty much everybody's problems. If not, do your own debugging, do your own research, and worst case, create an issue. And hopefully that's it. Goodbye.